Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
So there's an argument that there are serious structural disruptions that have happened, and that there are serious structural disruptions.
India, we are now faced with some pretty unique challenges. We have to accelerate our growth at a time when we are faced with an extra constraint of the environment.
Hello, I'm Shankkar Aiyar, and with me today is Dr. Rajiv Kumar, Vice Chairman of NITI Aayog, which is the Government of India's think tank. Welcome, Rajiv.
Hi, Shankkar.
One of the questions that is buzzing around the world and in India is the slowdown in the economy. Even if I sort of step away from the long-time target of $5 trillion and the high-frequency indicators about auto sales and other stuff, what exactly is your own take on where we are in the economy, without getting into the jargon of the cyclical and the structural and all? How would you sort of characterize what we are going through?
What we are going through, Shankkar, at the moment is a transition wherein the nature of economic activity, the nature of economic regulation, compliances are changing, have changed, and as a result of which there is, and also quite clearly the fact that the financial sector is yet to recover from some sense the excesses of previous years, and therefore its inability to finance growth has been compromised significantly. So I think there is therefore the current phase of slowdown, which I think we will emerge from because of all the measures that have been taken, not just in the last 3 months, but also in the last 5 years, because they have laid a foundation, they have laid a platform for investment sentiments to improve, and therefore also for our own sort of response of the stakeholders, economic stakeholders, to become more robust in the coming quarters.
You were one of the first people actually to sort of blow the clarion call in a sense that this is a serious issue and we have to address it, and that sort of led to the advancement of the finance minister's announcements or whatever was being worked out in the finance ministry as steps. So when you said that this is a serious issue, is it what we are facing is because of the things that were done or things that have not been done? How would you look at it?
No, my purpose of what I said was that this is not a situation that we have faced in the past. That there is something significantly different this time. It's not the usual cyclical slowdown. I was pointing at that time to the sort of jamming of the financial sector that had happened. So as a result of which, despite the fact that the RBI continued to say that there was enough liquidity, that liquidity was not finding its way to those who needed it, those who needed it. Mm-hmm. And I was pointing to the fact that today the trust, as it were, between economic agents, which was earlier there, was beginning to collapse. So that nobody was willing to, in some sense, lend to the other person. Now, everybody was playing extra conservative, extra cautious. And I was reminded at that time, and which is why I said what I did, of the post-2008 situation in the US, where the financial system as a whole was in the danger of completely jamming up. And if that happens, then the whole thing, in some sense,
it's almost freezed up, and which was the fear after ILFS and other things.
That's what, and I had been saying this, pointing this out, to the government, to my colleagues within the government, and that then, came out that in that particular statement, and I'm glad, therefore, that immediately after that, the finance minister. But you can also imagine that mine was the finance minister's announcements didn't just come as a result of what I said. It came as a result of some significant thinking, planning, and and design that went on within the government. In the finance ministry, NITI Aayog contributed to this in some sense. So there were these measures which are already in the pipeline. In the pipeline, it's just that they were triggered at that time.
So there's an argument that there are serious structural disruptions that have happened, and that there are serious structural disruptions given the change in technology, given the changing consumer behavior, given the changes in the World Trade Zone. Would you say that this is completely unique kind of situation, and yet the responses or the commentary around it seem to be business as usual?
I think you've hit the nail on the head, because the fact is that India, we are now faced with some unique challenges. We have to accelerate our growth at a time when we are faced with an extra constraint of the environment. We can't do whatever the other emerging economies did in terms of that. We are faced with a situation that our land laws, and our democratically elected governments are facing a constraint, vis-a-vis whether it's acquisition of land or it's, changing of the labor laws, etc.
So I was going to come to that, Rajiv. One of the things that seems to be the impression is that the economy is being managed from room 131 or 134 in North Block, from one room, and then it's getting inputs from, say, the PMO and from NITI Aayog. But frankly, all the next generation reforms are all located in the domain of the state governments in terms of labor laws, land, in terms of ease of doing business. All of these are in the domain of states. Why does it look like the states are disinterested parties, or the burden of the slowdown is not visiting them, or that they don't, you don't see? I mean, finance minister went around to all state capitals and held press conferences. We didn't see a single chief minister along with the finance minister. It would have given a sense of teamwork, nor have you seen any team line minister from the government sort of accompanying that. So to focus, what is the role of the states? Aren't they sort of
Shankkar,
responsible?
in my last 2 years, I have visited every state in the country, and I met all the chief ministers. And I think I beg to differ to a certain extent, because these chief ministers, being close to the ground, are very concerned about the growth, about the employment generation, about attracting investment, etc. It's just that I don't think they have the capacity, or they have the intellectual firepower to tackle the macroeconomic challenges that they face sometimes. And I think this is where the role of the NITI Aayog is very important, because we can work with them, we can try and create blueprints on them, and we are helping them to, in some cases already helping them to do so. So the state governments are, very cognizant and want to go on, because they know that their future, depends on that. And my own understanding at the moment is that there needs to be a platform, where all the states can come together and learn from each other and discuss these issues more often than what they get to do today.
So like a best practices platform that they can share and sort of.
Because out of the two mandates that NITI Aayog has, one is competitive federalism, for which we publish all the rankings that we do, and we are hoping that this will spur the states into action on each of these sectors in trying to improve those rankings. But the other is cooperative federalism, which is where we want to share the best practices with each other. Now that's, it happens once or twice a year when the governing council meets, but I think there's more, if you like, we can have regional council of states, because, it's like the NITI has.
The character of economic growth in regions is different from the whole.
Because, like, for example, we have created the NITI Forum for the Northeast region. So similarly, we can have one for the Himalayan states. The other one can be the coastal states, separately for the east and the west, and one for central. So if you have that, and if those meetings can be held more regularly, then I think there will be a forum where the states will get to focus. Now, we are trying to achieve this through the monitoring and mainstreaming of the sustainable development goals. And that's, we just brought out a volume called the localization of SDGs. We are setting up capabilities in each state for monitoring the SDGs, and then, setting up the mechanisms for achieving the targets. I think that will help in focusing the state's attention on the economic challenge.
I want to also sort of ask you about the sharing of best practices, whether it is maternal attention to maternal health care, neonatal health care in Tamil Nadu and other things. But before that, I wanted to sort of come two very pioneering efforts that NITI Aayog has done. One is in the codifying of labor laws into a more manageable, less unwieldy and more 21st century code. State governments don't seem to have sort of been enthusiastic in accepting it or adopting it. The other is we all know, 14%, almost half of India's workforce depends on barely 14% of the national income, which is where you see the agri-distress story sort of going around. Now, one of the ways to deal with this is to consolidate, bring scales, imports, contract farming. So there was a model contract farming act which was announced in the budget. I think you were also planning to go ahead and look at crop mapping and other. Why do we not see some of that sort of translating? Has it been adopted in states or states? These are, land, labor, capital, these are issues. So capital center can deal with, but land, labor, agricultural inputs, these are state subjects. And am I wrong in saying that they have been less than enthusiastic in adoption? Is it the bureaucracy?
No, it's every state is grappling with the challenge of accelerating economic growth and attracting more investment. It's just that at the state level, and I'm repeating myself, is that the capability, the capacity to deal with each of these challenges that you talked about, I think is, it needs to be built up further. Now, on the agricultural side, let me first, I think, clarify that 50% of those residing in the rural areas in agriculture, 50% of those have non-agriculture sources of income. So that therefore it's not as bad as that. The second point is that that clearly within agriculture you need lot more agro processing, value added, and diversification than you've had so far in the last 70 years. Our agriculture model needs a huge relook at this point of time, because and the Prime Minister pointed towards that by saying of doubling the farmers' income rather than continue to increase output, which was the earlier slogan, as it were. And doubling the farmers' income also means improving productivity, yield, and reducing the costs. I think we have to now find measures for it. And I have been a proponent in that respect for the zero budget natural farming model, which makes agriculture much less, in fact, independent of chemical inputs which are costly. And this is being tried out by about 20 lakh farmers to some very good results in the country so far. And I've visited.
And where would these projects be available?
For example, Himachal, Andhra Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, UP, in I think pretty much every block they are dispersed, but and Maharashtra, and all of these places are now there are farmers which are now experiencing and achieving the same yields level as with the fertilizers and other chemicals without using them at all. I think that's a very that is going to be a movement. I went recently to Gujarat, where there were 7,000 farmers present, and the Chief Minister was presenting this model along with the founder, Mr. Palekar. And I think there is growing enthusiasm and interest in this sort of farming. So I think that's one. And by the way, this particular form of farming also increases the amount of organic carbon in the soil, so that it helps to sequester carbon from the atmosphere into the ground. So that's one. But the other one, which is very important, is about this model tenancy law. Which is because a large parts of our rural land, arable land, are left uncultivated because the owners are not confident of their ownership rights once the tenants take over. So, which
or
is
the viability of
or the viability. So, which is why the NITI Aayog has come up with this modern, the model tenancy law. 2 states, Uttarakhand and UP, have adopted it, and I am hoping that others will adopt it. The third part, Shankkar, is about digitizing of the land records. And some of the states like Karnataka and Gujarat have done a lot in this regard. Andhra Pradesh has now achieved something, because once you do that, then what you can do is to create much better climate for investment in those lands, and also the transactions, and that will help in consolidating the land holdings. And if you can,
so you're saying that these first steps have to be done before you sort of get into collective farming or contract
that's
farming.
Right.
And where there is both forward and backward integration.
That's absolutely right. And the beginning of the farmers producers organization is the right step in that regard, because then you get what you call agripreneurs, which then bring these farmers together, and there are about 6,000 of them now working in the country, and that is then what will lead to higher agro processing. And India can emerge, in my view, as an agro exporter, and that's what we may want to do, or exporter of agriculture of agro processed commodities. I think that's what we need to work for, because otherwise just to displace the entire labor out of the countryside, I think may not be a viable option.
So to take you back a little bit in history, I remember in the late 80s, you had, along with Dr. Kelkar, done a paper on how to restructure industrial licensing and zones and everything. And now that we dismantled the license Raj and everything subsequently, thanks to the crisis and everything, but we haven't got rid of the permission Raj, the inspector Raj. So one of the things is that while ease of doing business is improving, you still have to do like 90, 100 permissions, clearances for a particular project. One of the suggestions is that probably if we did a flow chart of all the clearances and how many times the investor goes to the state capital and central in Delhi and up and down for various clearances, you might discover that a lot of it can be shrunk. Some of the need for these clearances may also. Some work I think has been done, and also one of the crucial components in this is the labor laws.
Yes.
How enthusiastic have states been about this?
No, some states have been very enthusiastic about it,
because you see them
Rajasthan
doing this
and,
magnetic Maharashtra
Rajasthan,
and magnificent.
See, that's the other issue that because only a very few states have recognized that having these once-off events will not solve anything at all. What you need is preparation and the follow-up for it to be achieve the result that you want, which is to attract larger investment into the states. But I think more and more states are beginning to realize that until and unless they have, for example, an inventory of land, which is already within their control, which they can offer to the private investor, so that is how the government can share the risk, the project risk, and make it much more attractive for the
industrial
investor.
development model of the
and all states, and also the central government are sitting in fairly large chunks of inventories. And Telangana, for example, has done an amazing thing: is digitize all its land holdings and put it up on the cloud, so that investors sitting abroad can actually pinpoint to the land that they wanted to acquire, and then are given the sort of permission, and they can set up the industries there, etc. But the more important thing that I sort of we were referring to were the
sharing of the
compliance burden. And I think the compliance burden, a large chunk of it is at the state level itself. And I think therefore each state will have to now look at what is the kind of regulatory
cholesterol
that is now sort of stopping the flow of investment. I think that requires and maybe what NITI Aayog could be doing is to have a sort of a ranking in terms of which states are doing a better job of it than the others, because I think that's the key. Unless we reduce the compliance and regulatory burden, we will not be able to reduce the rent seeking that goes on in the system. I think that's key for attracting more investment and making investment feel that there are government policies in support rather than trying to stop the activity that is going on.
So all of this also sort of gets you back to the work NITI Aayog has been doing on sustainable development goals, and the shared best practices. We are doing better than before, but we are still not, or because on hunger index, on malnutrition, we still suffer. We're bunched along with sub-Saharan Africa in some places. In some places, we're doing worse than even conflict hit Yemen. So, is there traction there? Are people enthusiastic?
A huge traction there, Shankkar. I've actually published a piece today in this morning in the Economic Times, which has questioned some of the conclusions that the Global Hunger Index has come out with, because they have not taken into consideration the last 3 or 4 years of our improvement. The UNICEF report has come out that our malnutrition numbers have dropped significantly by 4%. Our rate of decline of malnutrition has gone up from 1% per annum to 1.4, 1.6% per annum. We want to take it up to 2 levels, so the same thing is for anemia, women anemia, that those numbers have reduced. You must notice that there is thankfully today no report at all of hunger deaths, anywhere in the country, and there is today, because of a large number of states following the National Food Security Act, provision of food at very reasonable rates, 1, 2, 3 rupees per kilo of wheat or rice. So I think there is a huge improvement there, and any talk about India slipping on the global hunger index, I think is probably not.
It's a comparative reference,
but also it's not borne out, because you see they keep changing the number of countries, etc., etc. I chair the National Nutrition Council, and there we must admit, and I've pointed this out in several public forums, that we have a long way to go. We have a very long way to go, especially for reducing the malnutrition among the children from from 0 months to 24 months. But that requires, apart from the supply side, a huge behavioral change, and which is why we think that today there is a right time for us to have a nudge unit, within NITI Aayog, so that which can then work with the states to design some incentive structures which will help bring about this behavioral change among mothers, and for them to recognize that just simple feeding is not nutrition, and for the families to realize that the women's anemia and women's health is more important than what is done today. I think this is where I think the Prime Minister's talk about making development into a Jan Andolan is extremely important. So we have to now finally bring the people, into the process of meeting our targets.
I can see that there is the need to nudge social behavior amongst within the society and across the states. There's also need to nudge the political parties towards what is more important, what's more critical, and I think your task is fairly large and cut out for you, and wish you the best.
Thank you so much. Thank you.